The 1880 Constitution of the Muskogee Nation made it a crime to cut down a pecan tree, testifying to the importance of the pecan to indigenous Americans. European settlers will come to love the nut as well, which is why the official meal of Oklahoma includes the pecan pie. Pecans are the quintessential American nut, as American as apple pie and obesity, and they are the only native nut commercially produced in the U.S. The pecan originated in the lower Mississippi Valley and found its way to South and Central Mexico and even north to Ohio, serving as a valuable food source for Native Americans. The word pecan is derived from the Algonquin tribe's word for a nut that is too hard to crack by hand. It did much to encourage mobility among the native hunters and gatherers, because you see the pecan is alternate bearing, meaning it doesn't produce nuts every year, but every 2 to 4 years. Tribes couldn't keep returning to the same pecan patch every year, but had to travel to different patches in different years to time their arrival with the trees that would produce that year. So this encouraged tribes to travel more, increasing their interactions with other tribes and giving rise to regular trade patterns. For example, Apaches would drive herds of bison from Colorado to Texas, where they were met by members of the Mississippian tribes who traveled to Texas with their pecans, eager to trade the pecan for bison meat. The pecan stored so well and so valued by everyone that it could even serve as a source of currency. Now, the trees you see here were not raised from seed, but they were cloned. You see, pecans don't grow true to seed. If you grow trees just from seed, you don't know what type of pecan seed they will produce. Some will grow large, tasty nuts that are easy to open, but others will grow ridiculously small nuts that are almost impossible to crack. So instead of just growing pecan trees by seed, we clone the best trees, or as you'll see, the top part of the tree. What you're going to see in this video is how we start a pecan tree trunk from seed, how we clone another pecan tree onto that trunk, how we select which pecan cultivars to clone, how we manage pecan scab disease, and that's going to include a tour of the Oklahoma Mesonet weather system, how we thin pecans, and how thinning pecans makes it so that the pecan trees are no longer alternate bearing and will instead produce nuts every year. You're going to see how we harvest pecans, and finally you'll learn why pecans are such a nutritious food. The pecans you see in the orchard are really a combination of two pecans. One, you have the roots and the bottom part of the stump, and we call that the rootstock. That comes from, you grow it from seed usually. And then the top part comes from a completely different tree, one known to have good pecan nut properties when it grows, a clone that you're going to graft onto that stump. And what we're talking about now is how you grow that rootstock, that part that makes the root and the trunk at the bottom. And for that, you are going to start with a seed. And depending on what region you are, you want to get your pecan seeds from certain trees. So in Oklahoma, one of the best varieties for the rootstock is something called Peruque, P-E-R-U-Q-U-E. And so this is just going to be the bottom of the tree. And so we don't care about its genetics in the terms of what type of nut it produces. All we care is that the roots and that trunk is cold hardy. And the way we're gonna plant that tree is first we're gonna take the pecan once it's completely dried out, and we're gonna do something called stratify. This isn't scarify. We've talked about that in another video. This is stratify. And to do that, what you do, you're mimicking the process by which in the natural world the seeds from a pecan will fall on the ground. A squirrel will usually bury it, and then that seed, you don't want it germinating in December. You want it to wait until winter's over and then it germinates. So you want it to be able to sit in the ground when it's damp and wet and cold, and then only germinate when the cold has gone away. And when you simulate that, that's called stratify. And what we do is we take some kind of potting mix, something sterile. So this is a potting mix. It's going to have tree bark, perlite, vermiculite. It may have peat moss in it, that kind of thing. But it's something sterile. You want it sterile because you don't want any fungus in there that may cause infection. And you can see I've had it soaking in water. And then what I do, I want it damp, not wet. So I'm going to squeeze it really hard. I'm going to get a bunch of water out. And so now it's damp but not completely wet. And I'll do that over and over till I get enough media, and then I'll put a pecan in there. And then you get it covered with the media. Now usually it's best to use something like a polyurethane bag, something that will keep the moisture in, but also breathe to let oxygen and carbon dioxide in and out. But I found you can get by with just a plastic bag. And then what I do is I just zip it up, and then you're going to put this in the refrigerator at about 45 degrees Fahrenheit for about 2 to 3 months. And that's going to mimic the seed in the ground staying all winter. And then you don't take it out until you're getting ready to plant it. And so now maybe it's late spring and we take it out of the refrigerator. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to set the stratified seed down and let it just sit there for 2 days. Get it used to the new temperature. And then you could plant it right away, but what a lot of people like to do, especially the professionals, they're going to take this and they're going to place it under running water for about 2 to 4 days. And you want running water so fungal and bacterial infections won't accumulate around the seed. Obviously, if you don't live near a place where you can have running water, what you can do is you can just soak it in water and just change it every 12 hours, something like that. So you do that, you soak it in water for 2 to 4 days. You want to check it a lot to make sure it hasn't germinated, and then you're ready to plant it. And you'll want to first plant it in a container like this. And of course, the general rule for planting any seed is you plant it at a depth that's about 1.5 to 2 times the diameter of the seed. So if this is the diameter of the seed, you'll want to plant it about that deep. And you'll plant it using potting mix and something like this. And you want a container like this. It doesn't need to be big and round, but it does need to be deep because you want to encourage that taproot to go down, and you want it to have a lot of opening in the middle, in the bottom, because sometimes the taproot will even come out. You want to encourage that. And you're going to grow it in this container for a whole year, and then after it's 1 year old, next winter, you will plant it in the ground.
Hi, my name is Dr. Charles Rolla. I'm the pecan specialist here with the Samuel Robert Snowball Foundation, and today we're going to show you how to do a Texas inlay bark graft, and we're actually modifying it and calling it American bark graft by using duct tape. Some of the tools we'll use is just regular duct tape. You might need a set of hand pruners. You're going to need a good hand saw. I've chosen this one because it has offset blades, so it's going to cut a little quicker than some of the other saws. You need a good grafting knife. The grafting knife should have a flat blade, at least 2 to 2.5 inches long and sharp. And then finally you'll need some Elmer's glue to put on the top of your sign wood. All right, so when we're doing a Texas inlay bark graft, We're going to select a larger diameter tree. This can be done on trees anywhere from 1.5 inches up to about 8 inches in diameter. Anything larger than that, your success is going to go down because you're going to get way too much growth in 1 year, and it's a lot harder to protect that graft. So we're going to select this tree. This is a seedling, and we're going to cut it off right here between these branches, and we'll make one smooth cut, and then we'll start our graft. All right, because this tree is actively growing, we're going to make a cut on the back side through the bark, so we don't, once we cut through the tree, we don't peel the bark off the back side of the tree. So we're just going to cut through about 1/2 inch into that tree. Now we're going to cut from the front side and try to line it up with your cut that you made on the back, but it doesn't have to be perfectly in line. Now I'm just going to clean up the very tip of my cut. And now we have a place that we can put our sign wood onto. And then you're going to make one cut through the bark down. And make sure you go all the way through the bark. Then you want to peel it back just a little bit. You want to cut the very tip of your sign wood to remove the dried portion of the sign. And then we're going to make our cut using our pocket knife. We're going to make our cut about 2.5 inches long. And I'm going to remove this bud as I'm cutting. And you want to start straight into your wood and then twist your wrist so you're cutting just through about half of the diameter of the sign wood. And you're going to have a nice flat piece of wood that you're going to insert into your rootstock. After you make your front cut, you're going to make a small cut on the back side just to expose the cambium layer. Then you're going to line your sign wood up with your first cut that you made on your trunk, and you're going to cut right down the side of your sign. And then you're going to peel the bark back just a little bit so you can start your sign wood in. And once you start feeling it's being a little snug, use your end of your pocket knife and tap it down so that flat piece is snug, and then this beveled edge is still sticking above your rootstock. Okay, now we're going to use our duct tape to secure this graft. We're just going to pull that tape fairly tight around and over your cut you made on your rootstock. And then we're going to just push the exposed part down, and then we will use additional tape on top just to cover the top of our cut here to keep it from drying out. And then one last step, I peel half of my duct tape in half, and I'll put a little ribbon around the front here. And if you're doing multiple varieties, you can use different color so you can identify what variety you've grafted. And this is going to cover up the back portion of that sign wood that you left exposed. And then one last step on your sign wood is to use your Elmer's glue. Just apply it to the tip to keep it from drying out during the heat of the summer. The last step is to put a bird perch. You just remove a branch that you cut off the tree, and we're just going to tape it so it's taller than our sign. So whenever a bird lands, they're going to kick off of our bird perch instead of our sign, our graft union here. And then you're done with that graft. This is a inlaid bark graft that was applied 2 years ago. You can see where we cut the tree off right here. And right here was our original piece of sign wood. And so you can tell that the tree has grown quite a bit in caliper, and we have a new start on our new variety tree with this graft.
Before we get into grafting, I want to talk about what we mean when we say varieties of pecans or cultivars of pecans. So varieties are like breeds of animals, and that's something you can wrap your head around because you're used to thinking of breeds of dogs or breeds of cattle. And breeds of dogs, breeds of cattle, if they were plants, we would say they are true to seed, meaning when you breed to shorthorns, you get an animal that is a shorthorn. When you breed to Brahmas, you get an animal that is a Brahma, meaning the offspring is very similar to its parents. But pecan trees do not grow true to seed. Now, we could call things like Pawnee and Kansa pecan varieties, because just like the shorthorn and the Brahma are different, they have different physical characteristics, the Pony and the Kansa pecan varieties have different characteristics. But the Pony and the Kansa are not true to seed, meaning if you plant the pecan nut from a pony tree, you're not necessarily going to get anything that's like the pony. It won't have those typical dimensions like you see there. If you're able to get a pecan seed whose father was a pony and mother was a pony, the child you get is not going to be a pony, may not even resemble the pony tree. And that nut would actually be considered a native variety because every single pecan tree grown from seed is considered its own breed, its own variety, has its own unique genetics. And we refer to them as native pecans. So a native pecan is not a breed. It just means the pecan was grown from seed, and one native is going to have very, very different genetics than another native, even if they came from the same mother and father. A man once had this pecan tree that produced just a great nut, so he wanted to have lots of other trees that also produced that great nut. And so he took lots of seeds that came from that tree and grew them from seed without grafting. And what you see there are the seeds from all those offspring. So all those nuts came from trees, and all those trees had the exact same mother. And so that's why we say pecans don't grow true from seed. Yeah, you may have a great tree that produces great nuts, but if you plant the seed and try to get another tree like that, it's just not going to happen. So the only way you can preserve the genetics of a tree is by cloning it. And we clone a tree by grafting. Now, whenever we clone a tree, we call that a cultivar. So you can have an orchard with lots of different Pawnee pecan tree clones, and we call all that's the Pawnee cultivar. Then you can have lots of Kansa pecan tree clones, and we call that a different cultivar, the Kansa cultivar. And so what we have here is you go to most any orchard, they're going to have the pecan trees there, unless they're native pecans. They're going to have a stump that was grown from seed, and we refer to that as rootstock. And they're going to graft a scion. Scion's a small branch from the tree with the genetics you want. They're going to graft that branch onto the rootstock, and then you have your clone tree. So the whole thing isn't cloned, just the top. And so if the top, the scion, the branch, came from a Pawnee pecan tree and it's grafted onto a rootstock, we've cloned that Pawnee variety, at least at the top, and we call that the Pawnee cultivar. I want to emphasize that cloning or grafting is the only way you can have an orchard and produce lots of high quality nuts. To give you an example, what I have here in the left, my daughter is holding 2 pecans, and on your right, that's me holding the same 2 pecans. The little one there is from a native pecan tree, and it was really, really difficult to crack. You would almost need a hammer to crack that one. But the other one, the bigger one, that's a Pawnee nut. It was really easy to crack. And so, you know, if you want really good nuts, you have to clone good trees.
You have to graft because when you just have a tree that's grown from a seed, you have no idea what you're going to get, and most of them are going to be inferior nuts. Now, there's a myth that when we bred pecans to be larger, we sacrifice flavor. And along with this myth is the idea that native pecans actually taste better. But it's not true. I once published an article with a grad student in hort technology where I did taste tests of different pecans. And I compared Kanza cultivar, Pawnee cultivar, and then native pecans. What I found was that in blind taste tests, where people didn't know what type of pecan they were eating, and I compared the Kanza cultivar, the Pawnee cultivar, and the native cultivar, they actually prefer the Kanza and the Pawnee over the native in terms of appearance, in terms of texture, in terms of flavor, and in terms of overall satisfaction. Now, part of this, what I also found was that all the pecans basically tasted the same, but people liked the larger pecans. And so when they ate a larger pecan, they also said it had a better flavor. In the experiment, I also cut all the pecans so that they were about the same size. And in that case, they thought the Kanza, Pawnee, and native had the same flavor, and they liked them all the same. So basically, according to my research, all pecans taste about the same. People can't tell the difference, and they like larger ones better. Now, when you just ask people whether natives or clones taste better, they tend to say natives. They just think it's going to taste better. But in blind taste tests where they don't actually know which one's native and which one isn't, they definitely prefer the clones, the cultivars. And that's why I say in this study that although a previous study showed that consumers prefer pecans in a hypothetical, meaning non-tasting situation, when they're labeled as either native or clones or improved something else, when the pecans are actually eaten and there are no labels designating the pecan type, they do prefer the clones. When choosing which cultivars to raise, it's important to understand how the pecan tree reproduces. So every tree will have both male flowers and female flowers, but they can't self-fertilize. They can't self-pollinate. The male flowers, of course, are going to produce pollen, and the pollen goes from one tree to another tree and pollinates the female flowers on that other tree. And when that happens, they begin to produce pecan nuts. But they can't self-pollinate because any one tree is going to release pollen at a time when the female flowers are not receptive to pollen. And the pecan tree does that deliberately to increase its genetic diversity. The pecan tree does not want to clone itself. So if you have a pecan orchard consisting of only one cultivar, say maybe only the Kanza cultivar, you're not going to get hardly any pecans harvested. To have a good harvest, you need to make sure you use certain cultivars that are able to pollinate each other. So I've got some examples here. So we have the Kanza in pink. It shows when the female flowers are receptive to pollen. And in blue, it says when that tree sheds pollen. So this Kanza tree is going to shed pollen after its pistils are receptive. So the pistils are going to shut down. It's no longer able to receive pollen, and that's when the Kanza actually produces pollen. And the Caddo cultivar is the opposite. It's going to shed pollen before its female flowers are able to receive pollen. And so what you want to do is you want to find cultivars where one tree is shedding pollen at the same time another tree is able to receive the pollen. And you can see here that the Kanza and the Caddo trees, they are compatible because one is producing pollen at the same time the other is able to receive it. When you're establishing orchard, this means you're generally going to want at least 4 different cultivars, and you need to make sure that they're compatible, like the Kanza and the Caddo are. And as a general rule, you want compatible cultivars to be located around within 150 feet of each other. Making sure your pecan trees have enough plant nutrients can be a challenge with pecans. they're kind of funny. So, most plants, you can just do a soil test, see how much, let's say, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium and zinc is in the soil, and then you figure out how much the plant needs, and whatever the soil is lacking, you can just apply it to the soil and the plant will take it up. But pecans, they're funny about nutrient uptake. You can't always tell which nutrients in the soil they're going to be able to take up. This is especially true for zinc. You can have tons of zinc in the soil, but the pecan tree may not be able to take it up. So what you do instead is you submit samples of the pecan tree leaves instead of a soil sample to a lab. The lab is going to test it for nutrient deficiencies, and then the lab will tell you how much of each nutrient to apply. And for some nutrients, especially zinc, pecan trees they're really bad about taking it up. That's like they don't know how to. And so in these cases, you have to apply the zinc fertilizer directly to the trees themselves, to the leaves in the trees, by using a piece of equipment like this to shoot the fertilizer way up into the tallest branches of the pecan tree. Disease management is also a challenge raising pecans, especially in Oklahoma. There are lots of different insects and microorganisms that can affect the pecan tree, but in Oklahoma, the biggest challenge is a fungal disease called pecan scab. And you can see what happens when it affects the trees. You get these little black dots like that. It can affect the stems, the leaves, the nuts themselves. It hurts the tree, makes it difficult for the tree to produce fruit, and so it needs to be contained and prevented. Now, some cultivars are more scab resistant than others, but all pecan trees have some susceptibility to pecan scab, and especially in Oklahoma, you're going to have to spray to control scab regularly. So let's look at pecan scab in more detail and see like when we need to apply fungicides. If you have a pecan orchard in Oklahoma and you want it to be healthy, you've got to protect it against a disease called pecan scab disease. This is a fungal disease, and so you prevent it by applying a fungicide. But of course, fungicides are expensive, so you only want to apply the fungicide if you really have to. And so when do we have to? When does pecan scab become a problem? Well, research has shown that you tend to get bigger problems with scab disease, pecan scab, when the humidity's high and the temperature's high. Specifically, we have a thing called scab hours. And a scab hour is when an hour goes by and the relative humidity is greater than 90% and the temperature is greater than 70% degrees Fahrenheit. And research has also shown that if you say have a pecan orchard and some of your varieties are highly susceptible to pecan scab, because some trees are more susceptible than others, then starting from the time your last fungicide application wears off, starting from the time your last fungicide application provides no more protection, if just 10 scab hours go by, you need to apply another fungicide application. So if just 10 hours go by where the relative humidity is greater than 90% and the temperature is greater than 70 degrees Fahrenheit, you need to apply another application. Conversely, we've learned if your pecan tree varieties aren't very susceptible to scab disease, have low susceptibilities, that threshold is 30 scab hours. Now, fortunately, you don't have to keep track of scab hours at your farm. The Oklahoma Mesonet system can do that for you. Here we are, this is Pecans, Oklahoma, and this is one weather station that's a part of the Oklahoma Mesonet system. And the Mesonet system has 120 of these weather stations located all throughout Oklahoma, and there's at least one of these stations in each of Oklahoma's 77 counties. And there's lots of instruments you can see here, and some measure relative humidity, some measure temperature, others measure different things like soil temperature and precipitation. And so that information is collected here every 5 minutes. It's sent to the Mesonet offices, and there they track scab hours for you. So that means if you're a pecan farmer and this is the closest weather station to you and you're concerned about pecan scab, all you have to do is go to the Mesonet website, go to the Pecan Scab Advisory, select the Pecans weather station,
Enter some information about your last fungicide application, and it will tell you how many scab hours have passed and whether you should apply another application of fungicides. And now we're going to look at that pecan scab advisory in more detail, but first let's learn more about the Mesonet system itself. Let's go visit the Mesonet offices that's in the National Weather Center building in Oklahoma, which happens to be located at the world's ugliest college campus.
Hi, Wesley here with your weekly Mesonet weather report. Summers in Oklahoma can be unpleasant due to the oppressive heat. Welcome to the Mesonet weather report. I'm Wesley. We've had a lot of severe weather this past week, and we're fortunate that we got a lot of rain, not a lot of flooding. It was a lot of cooler than normal weather, so a nice week for Oklahoma weather in the state. Filming Oklahoma Mesonet happens every Wednesday here at the Oklahoma Mesonet. This is our recording room where Gary and I record our weather segment for the public. We have to record on Wednesday by a certain time so that the editors have time to put the show together for the show that airs on Saturday and Sunday morning. We are at the National Weather Center in Norman on the OU campus. So kind of unique that I am the only OSU employee on the OU campus, but we've had this position ever since Mesonet started in 1994. So we are in a recording studio specifically set up for this Mesonet weather segment that Gary and I do each week for Oklahoma Sunup. We're here at the National Weather Center in Norman on the OU campus. This building is full of several different types of employees. There are about 540 employees here, I'm told, about half of them being federal employees that work for the National Weather Center, or NOAA, with the Fed side of the government. The other half of the employees here are mainly OU professors, so for the School of Meteorology, and a huge research component that does research on radars. Just about anything weather related is done in this building. This is, for the national side of the program, this is the Severe Storms Center, where all of the advisories that go out for the entire United States happen from this one location. So anytime there is a tornado watch or a severe weather watch or a fire watch, all of those type of activities happen here at this office in Norman for the entire United States. And then from there, it goes to local forecast office with the National Weather Service, who refine those and who put out the actual warnings when a tornado or a severe storm event happens. I work for the Oklahoma Mesonet system here within the National Weather Center. The Oklahoma Mesonet is a joint program jointly operated by OSU and OU together. We currently have 120 towers across the state. Most of those are located on private property, private lands, but that also includes the OSU research stations, the 2 OU research stations that are specifically for weather, as well as some other state and county lands to make up the 120 sites. Each one of those towers collects weather throughout the day. They actually take a recording every 2 or 3 seconds, and then we get a reading from the tower, from each tower, every 5 minutes. Every 5 minutes we get all of the weather data that happens above ground. So things like wind speed, air temperature, barometric pressure, we get a reading every 5 minutes. We also have sensors below the soil line to record soil temperature and soil moisture at 4 different depths. We have 2-inch, 4-inch, 10-inch, and 24 inches at each one of the locations across the state. We have those sensors underneath sod as well as underneath a chemically treated bare soil to simulate a clean-tilled farm. Those sensors take a little bit longer to read and to collect the data, so every 15 minutes we get a soil temperature reading, and every 30 minutes we get a soil moisture reading from across the state. Now our information comes every 5 minutes here to the OU department here at the National Weather Center. It's processed, some quality control operations happen on the raw data, and then we're able to disseminate it back out to the public within about another 3 to 5 minutes from the time the data comes into our department. So we're able to get as close to real-time weather information on our app or on our website as any other weather network out there. The data is collected, sent to us, say at 5 minutes after the hour, and by 9 or 10 minutes after the hour, it's in your hands as a user that needs that real-time or close to real-time weather information. I work in part of the Mesonet program called the Agriculture Division. I'm the Agriculture Coordinator here at the Oklahoma Mesonet, the one and only employee that works in this area. And I, as mentioned before, am an employee of Oklahoma State University and have been for a long period of time. This joint operation between OSU and OU is the only way this statewide program could have stayed in operation for almost 30 years. January 1 of 2024 will be our 30-year anniversary. Here in the agriculture portion of the program, what my job is to take the raw immediate weather data that we collect every 5 minutes and put it into programs or packages for the farm and ranch community out there. So we take things like temperature, soil moisture, wind speed, put it into what we call value added or decision making tools for the public to use. And we currently have about 16 of those value added products on the agriculture portion of our website. So anybody can access that website, or they can access the data from our apps that are available for both smartphone platforms, Apple and Android, and to obtain access to that weather information or those ag tools free of charge for the state. We're in the Pecan Scab Advisory, where the main page shows you the infection hours. What we do, there's a certain trigger of weather variables, and specifically humidity and a temperature range, where we know that pecan scab can develop on pecan leaves and fruit. So on this main page, you can see the last 14 days, the infection hours for each location, each mesonet tower, or you can switch over to the season-long part of the program that starts from March 1 going forward. I'm going to leave it on the 14 days. You can see on the website you have access with this pull-down menu to all 120 locations. For today's demonstration, we're going to stay on one of OSU's research stations for pecans, which is at the Pecans Research Station. The next pull-down menu has a lot of different products to look at. The main part of the program that you can look at to help advise you in your decision making on the farm is this Spray Decision Advisor tab. So once you click it, you have to provide a little bit of input data for the tool to be able to make a decision or help you advise you with your operation. The first box is pecan variety. Now, we don't list the pecan varieties here, but they're broken into 3 different categories: highly susceptible, moderately susceptible, and resistant. If you're not familiar with your variety of how that falls into, there is a how to use page down at the bottom of the page. It's a PDF that will open that does have all of the major pecan varieties we grow in Oklahoma, in which category they would fit into. I'm going to select moderately susceptible. The next category is the start date. Now this is typically, if we're in the growing season like we are today, this would be your last fungicide application date. So let's just assume we made an application on the 15th of June was our last fungicide application. Today is July the 18th. So about a month ago was our last fungicide application. The last box that we have to select is how long that fungicide is expected to protect those pecan leaves before it starts to wear out and the infection starts to take hold. There are 5, 7, 10, or 14 days of protection that you can select depending upon what type of fungicide you're using. So let's select the longest protection period that we offer, which is 14 days, and then get data button is pressed. That will create a graph for your station that you're looking at. Again, I'm at Pecans. As you can see here, we have a graph of the last 14 days, the infection hours as well. That's shown in red. The blue block would be the forecasted hours for the next 3.5 days. So you can see they are not forecasting any infection hours for the next 3 days, but based on the accumulation over the last 14 days, we are in a category for this specific situation where a fungicide spray would be recommended to protect those pecans going forward. Following this program has the ability to reduce our total fungicide sprays on a managed pecan crop, or it will effectively time your fungicide applications so that pecan scab becomes less of an issue for pecan production here in Oklahoma.
Perfect. Since the Weather Center building was on the OU campus and I had never been to the OU campus before, I thought this would be a good time for me to drive around and do a little tour of everything. This is the OU football stadium where, of course, you know, in 2014 our player Tyreek Hill returned a punt for 91 yards to bring us to overtime, where we then kicked a field goal to beat OU 38-35 on their own home field. It is by far the ugliest campus I've ever seen, and if you've been there, you know that these are actual buildings on the University of Oklahoma campus. This is really what they think is good architecture. Now, of course, if you visit OU and go on a campus tour and see these buildings, you're not going to be very impressed. You're not going to want to go to the University of Oklahoma. And that's why the University of Oklahoma had to fudge some of its statistics to make it seem like a more appealing place to go to school. Of course, many of you know that when the Big 12 told University of Oklahoma they either had to stop cheating or they would have to leave the conference, they decided that they would leave the conference. And that's why OU left the Big 12 for the SEC. Now, I know what you're thinking. Dr. Norwood, did you visit the location in Norman, Oklahoma where Baker Mayfield tried to run for the police and got tackled? No, that actually happened in Fayetteville, Arkansas. However, I did manage to capture a picture of their current quarterback on campus.
Remember earlier we said that pecans are alternate bearing, meaning if it produces a whole lot of nuts this year, the next year or two they're probably going to produce very few nuts. And well, that's an obstacle if you're running a farm. You'd rather it be more consistent. And you can make production more consistent by doing what we call nut thinning, where you literally shake some of the nuts out of the tree when they're in development. That way, the pecan tree can make sure it has plenty of resources to produce the nuts that remain on the tree, and you'll get really good high-quality nuts. And then next year, you can have an equally large harvest. And you want to thin the pecan orchard at the water stage of the pecan development. That's when you can cut into the pecan, like this fellow's doing here. Look at all that water that pops out. That water stage is when you want to do the thinning. In Oklahoma, that's usually going to be around August. To thin the nuts, you want to use a piece of equipment like this, and notice that it's going to, it's got soft pads, and then it's just going to shake the tree. And he's just going to kind of eyeball it till it looks like about the right amounts. The amount of nuts you want to thin, the percent you want to fall off, depends on the variety, but just kind of as a basic rule of thumb, tends to be around 50%. So when you thin pecan trees, you're shaking about 50% of the nuts off. And nut thinning really does work. These are some data from some research OSU has done. They had some trees that they thinned using the methods we saw there, and that's the blue line. And you can see yields tend to go up over time, but the variability in yield from one year to the next isn't that large, but they also had a control group. That's the orange line you see there. And you can see that in this control group where they didn't thin the nuts, that production is really incredibly volatile. So it can be really low one year, then really high the next year, then really low another year, then really high next year. And so each year you don't really know what kind of harvest you're going to get. For planning purposes and to keep a good market and everything, you always want to make sure production is somewhat smooth over the years, and nut thinning can do that. Like most of agriculture, pecan harvesting is heavily mechanized. You can see we have a harvester here, and all they do is something you mount on the back of a tractor, and it shakes the pecan tree and shakes the pecans loose. And then there's another piece of equipment you then bring in, and this piece of equipment here is going to pick up the pecans that have already been shaken off from the tree and are just lying there on the ground.
This piece of equipment you see shaking the nuts off the tree, it was actually invented by an Oklahoman by the name of Basil Savage. And there's an interesting story behind this, so we're gonna look at him a little bit. When he was young, he had some pecan trees, and they had some machines to shake it, but they were really big and expensive. So most of the times they just climbed the trees and hit the branches with the pole. But Basil Savage, well, he said he didn't climb trees very well, and he said his wife wasn't going to climb trees either. So he had to come up with some other way of getting those nuts out of the tree. And he was a clever guy, so he figured out how to do it on his own. So he came up with his own invention for a shaker that could hook up to the back of a tractor and shake the nuts loose. But as soon as he built it, he destroyed it, because you see, even though he knew it worked, he didn't have the money at the time to patent his invention and take it to market, and he was so scared someone else was going to steal it. So he had to destroy it before someone could come by and copy his design and steal it. Well, he eventually did find the money to patent the machine and take it to market, and he was able to rebuild it, to recreate his invention after destroying it, and he was able to market it, and now it's used all across the country, all around the world at least. And he's considered the Henry Ford of the pecan industry. And this started, remember his name is Basil Savage, this started Savage Equipment Company, which now sells all kinds of machines to pecan producers across the world.
Pecans and nuts in general are considered one of the healthiest foods you can eat. Pecans are particularly healthy because they're low in saturated fats, the bad fats. They're high in mono unsaturated fats. Those are the good fats. They're high on omega-3 fats, which reduces inflammation. And they have lots of fiber and essential nutrients like calcium, magnesium, vitamin E, vitamin A. But where pecans particularly shine is its antioxidants. And so you can see in this graph here, when we compare pecans to other nuts like walnuts, almonds, and cashews, they have considerably more antioxidants in it than the other nuts. But chances are you don't really know what antioxidants are. You just know they're good. So we're going to spend a couple minutes and go into detail about exactly what antioxidants do and why they benefit our health. To understand the role of antioxidants, we have to go back and remember some of our basic chemistry. So in your body, there are lots of oxygen atoms. And these oxygen atoms, they want 2 electrons in their first shell, and they have 2 electrons in the first shell. But they want 8 electrons in the second shell, but only have 6. So they're out there searching for 2 more electrons to fill its second layer. Also in your body are hydrogen atoms. And hydrogen atoms, they want 2 electrons in their first shell, but they only have 1. So these hydrogen atoms are out there, they're trying to find another electron to fill their first shell. You have both oxygen atoms and hydrogen atoms wanting more electrons. Well, it turns out they can share electrons. So hydrogen atoms are going to connect to the oxygen atom. They're going to share one of their electrons. And now everyone here is happy. The oxygen now has 8 electrons in its second shell. Hydrogen has 2 electrons in its first shell. And so everybody is happy. And of course, what we have there is H2O, water.
It's important to understand that when this molecule was formed, it was a peaceful process, a peaceful activity, and that no other molecules were altered in the formation of H2O. But now bad things can happen in your body that causes you to lose one of those electrons that's in that electron pair in the molecule. Radiation from the sunlight, toxins, an unhealthy diet, alcohol, all of that can cause the molecule to lose one of those electrons. And when that happens, that molecule now becomes what we call a free radical. Now, free radicals can happen naturally to anyone, regardless what kind of health they're in, but some things increase the rate of free radical production. Things like exposure to pollution, radiation, and an unhealthy diet lead to more free radicals in your body. This is a problem because those 2 electrons that were paired, they really love each other. And so when one is lost, the other one, you can say, becomes very lonely, and the molecule itself becomes extremely unhappy, and it wants to go out and find a new electron to replace the old one. Now you have this free radical roaming around in your body, desperate in need for another electron, and if no electrons are freely available, it will steal an electron from another molecule. Now let's suppose this free radical gets near a strand of DNA. There's electrons in that DNA, so that free radical is going to steal an electron from that DNA, causing a change in the DNA molecular structure. And this is dangerous, and that's where you get genetic mutations. Let's review what happened. We had a molecule that loses an electron from an electron pair, and that makes it very unhappy. And so it becomes a free radical, and it's now going to seek out another electron from any place it can get it. And it's going to rip an electron from an otherwise stable molecule, and this is a violent process that harms those other molecules. And that molecule that had its electron stolen, it's no longer performing its function in the human body, its proper function. And if it's DNA, it can cause a DNA mutation. And what's going to result is bad health. In the case of a DNA mutation, that can result in cancer. And here's where antioxidants come in. Antioxidants are molecules with just a bunch of electrons in its outer shells that it will freely give to other molecules that want one. So the antioxidant comes near a free radical, and the free radical quickly takes one of the electrons from the antioxidant. So the free radical is a normal molecule once again, and the antioxidant has lost an electron, but it's still a stable molecule. It's not a dangerous molecule. So the antioxidant, it helps neutralize the free radical by turning it back into a normal molecule without it itself becoming a dangerous molecule. Visually, here's our free radical, and it's angry because it's missing an electron from that electron pair right there, and so it's going to go out and it's trying to find another electron, and it will damage another molecule to get that electron if it has to. Before this free radical can damage a DNA molecule, an antioxidant comes around, and then the antioxidant gladly gives one of its electrons to the free radical, and now the free radical is a normal water molecule. The antioxidant remains a safe molecule to have in the body, and the potential damage that could have been done to the person's health is prevented. So now you see why pecans are considered so healthy. You're always going to have some free radicals in your body, and those free radicals, they can make you age faster, they can cause cancer, they can cause other diseases, but having antioxidants in your body prevents those free radicals from doing lots of damage to other cells in your body, and therefore it reduces the rate at which you age, it reduces cancer, it reduces diseases. And pecans are packed full of these antioxidants, and so they're one of the best foods you can possibly eat.